All right, so this is factoring by grouping. So this first little piece is just some things to remember. So let me just go back through this real quick. Here we have something where we have to distribute, right? Well, I have this plus sign in the middle. So this isn't like the problems we've been seeing recently, but I believe I've given you at least one or two problems that look like this before, where you have two distributions that we have to do. So let's just do this real quick. If I were to simplify this, I would have to distribute each of these, right? So x times x, that gives me x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. Here I have positive 4x times x, that gives me 4x. And 4 times negative 3, that's negative 12. So here we have four terms, but I do notice that my two middle terms combine, they're like terms, right? So I can add those together. So I get x squared plus x minus 12. And I can't get any simpler than that. I've combined all my like terms. So that would be as simple as I can make it, right? So what I want you to notice is I'm going to do number 2, and let's see what happens. Okay, so this is actually just where I would use my box, right? I'm going to go ahead and just do FOIL because I can do it real quick. I have x times x. That's my first terms. I have x times negative 3, which is negative 3x. Here I have x times positive 4, which is 4x. And the last terms I get negative 12. And again, I should notice that my middle terms are like terms, so I can combine those. So I get x plus x minus 12. Okay, so what I want you to notice is I got the same exact answer, okay? And this one looks just a little bit different than the one on the number 1. And the way it's different is that I have this in parentheses and this in parentheses. But if I look over here, I have two different parentheses, but what I should notice is that they are the same exact term on the inside the parentheses as this one, okay? And it's inside this parentheses is outside of my parentheses here, okay? So what I'm trying to show you here is that you can actually separate parentheses and move them, or you could do it the other way around, which is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to start, we're going to try and get from here, and we're going to convert it into this, okay? But first we have to get here, and that's how we're going to be factoring by grouping. We're going to kind of combine those two things. So we just have two examples today, basically combining all our skills that we've learned with factoring. This is the last bit of factoring we're going to do. So we have a big, huge polynomial, something that we haven't seen before, but what we're going to do is we're just going to chunk it down into little pieces. So even though I have 6x to the third minus 4x squared plus 15x minus 10, I'm going to, for a minute, my first step is I'm just going to not look at those last two terms, okay? And I'm going to look at my first two terms and I'm going to say, what do I have in common? Just like when I was finding a common factor. I need to find my common factor for these two terms. And I'm going to say, oh, I noticed that they both have a 2x squared in common. So I'm going to pull that out. 2x squared. And if I pull that out of my first term, I'm left with 3x. And here I'm left with minus 2. Okay, so you can see that I just pulled out this 2x squared out of these two. I still have this in the back, so now I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to cover up this portion and say I don't want to look at that. I want to look at these last two and say, what do we have in common? Well, I think I see that they have a 5 in common. 15x and negative 10, yeah, they have a 5 in common. So I'm going to pull out a 5. And if I pull out a 5, I'm left with 3x minus 2. Okay? So what I'm hoping you're noticing is after I do that, what I have in my parentheses in both cases is exactly the same. Okay? And they have to be exactly the same inside those parentheses for this to work. So if you get different numbers inside the parentheses from this pair and this pair, if they don't match up exactly, then something went wrong, okay? But because these do match up, I can take these numbers on the outside and put them in their own set of parentheses. So I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to say 2x squared plus 5, because that's the other one. Put that in parentheses, and this one becomes 1. I know that seems kind of weird to go from 2 to 1 and to have these two out here and put those in parentheses. But just to be certain that it works, let's go ahead and carry out this multiplication. If I was to do that, I'll do it right over here. 2x squared plus 5, 3x minus 2. I would do my first, which is 6x cubed. Do my outer, which is negative 4x squared. Do my inner, which is 15x, and do my last, which is negative 10. And this is the exact same as that. So I know that this is what it factors to, okay? And this is factoring by grouping. So all I've done is I've looked at my first two terms, I found a common factor, pulled it out, and then I looked at my last two terms, found a common factor, and pulled it out, okay? And then I take those two common factors and I put them inside their own set of parentheses. So let's try it once more. Cover up my last two terms. For example, number 2, I have 5n to the third, 35n squared. Well, I know that they both have n squared in common because this one's one higher. So I know I can write down my n squared. And now I need to look at my numbers, 5 and 35. Well, those both have 5 in common. So now I need to figure out what my term is. Now I need to figure out what my term is on the inside. So 5n squared from 5n cubed, that leaves me with just n. And 5 times 7 is 35. So plus 7, n squared is already there, so it's just n plus 7. Now I look at my last two terms, negative 2n and negative 14. Well, I have negative 2 in common, right? Negative 2 is in common. What's inside is n plus 7. Okay? Again, these two must be exactly the same for this to work. I look at it, I see that they're both the same. Good. So now I can take these two terms and put them in their own set of parentheses, excuse me. Okay, so here's my complete answer. This is how I factored it by grouping. And again, of course, if you want to double check your work, you can always multiply that out, and what you get should always be what you started with. So here is my answer, and I am completely done. Pretty short lesson, last thing on factoring, so I hope we got it down by now. If you have any questions, remember to write them down and have them ready for class so that we can answer them together.